The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Probably the COVID pandemic was more experience of pestilence than you ever wanted. But what if it turned out that much of human history has been shaped by much bigger plagues and the germs that caused them? Author Jonathan Kennedy makes that case tonight. First up, we'll find out why psychologists are asking, does depression have an evolutionary function? It's Tuesday, June 13th, and that's next on The Agenda. The theory of evolution holds, roughly speaking, that over time, nature selects out the traits in a species that aren't helpful for it to succeed. Well, if so, why does something as not helpful, indeed often immobilizing and impenetrable as depression, continue to exist as part of the human condition? Let's get into that with, in Brighton, Michigan, Randolph Nesse, Emeritus Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Michigan and author of Good Reasons for Bad Feelings, Insights from the Frontier of Evolutionary Psychiatry. In Halifax, Nova Scotia, Marianne Fisher, Professor of Psychology at St. Mary's University in Halifax and an affiliate faculty member at the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University. And here in our studio, Paul Andrews, Professor of Evolutionary Psychology at McMaster University in Hamilton. And Paul, it's good to meet you and have you here in our studio. And to Randolph and Marianne and Points Beyond, thank you for joining us tonight as well. I want to start with a quote from Inverse.com, which is an online magazine, covers all sorts of topics like technology, science, culture, mostly for a millennial audience. And here's what they say. Depression is an evolutionary conundrum. On the one hand, it's the leading cause of disability worldwide. On the other, the genes that give rise to it have been around at least as long as modern humans have walked the earth. That means it must play a role in our survival. Okay, Marianne, to you first. An evolutionary conundrum is how they describe it. How would you characterize it?
I think it's very useful to think of depression as something that is just part of the human condition. And I do agree that it's being part of our evolutionary past. And to view it as something that is negative is just needless. So the conundrum really, I think, is being encapsulated in that quotation because it's, we don't like to think of it as something that could be useful or has played an important role over our entire existence, but it is part of who we are, just like being happy and sad and fearful and angry are part of who we are. So it's a really mixed bag.
Paul, how would you characterize it?
Yeah, I really like what Marianne just said. I view depression as an emotion like many other emotions. And what we know about painful feelings, painful emotions, is they all motivate us to avoid something harmful in our lives. If we think about the pain that you feel when you have a sprained ankle, what it does is it motivates you to keep your weight off your ankle so you avoid further injuring it. Same thing with fear. Jealousy motivates you to avoid an infidelity, et cetera, et cetera.
What does depression motivate us to do?
That's where the conundrum is, as I see it. It's been a puzzle for many of us studying depression to figure out what it is that depression motivates us to avoid.
Well, let me hold you off there, because
sure,
we're going to unpack
yeah.
that during the course of our discussion. We'll get into, Randolph, I'll get you in here now. We're going to obviously get into different theories as we continue our conversation. But in your view, to what extent are we still unraveling the evolutionary mystery of why depression exists?
It's so wonderful to talk with my colleagues about this because we are right in the midst of trying to get this all straight. Everyone who studies depression has tried so desperately to find the bad genes or the spot in the brain or the neurotransmitter, and it's been disappointing. Everybody's calling for new directions, and I think we now really have one, and it's not something made up. It's the fundamental biological theory, and as Paul just said, we need to try to figure out why the capacity for low mood exists and why it's badly regulated sometimes. And just like he said, it's really mental pain. It seems like natural selection making us having no pain would be great, except sadly, people who are born with no pain usually are dead by the time they're 30 or 40. So there are very useful ways, and it all depends on the situation you're in. The mystery, though, I think, is why the regulation mechanism gives us so much useless depression.
All right, Paul, let's follow up on that. How does your work explain why depression exists?
My primary interest, first of all, it's important to know what we're talking about when we use the word depression. Most everybody in the field understands that the word depression really applies to a collection of traits. They share sadness and the loss of pleasure in common, but they differ in other features. So for instance, when you get sick within an infection, that causes a type of depression. When you're starving, that also causes a type of depression. The kind of depression I'm interested in is probably one of the most clinically important ones, and that's ruminative depression. It's a depression that occurs that causes you to think persistently about the problems that made you depressed in the first place, particularly the causes of those problems and the consequences of those problems. So that's just background for what it is that I try to study. My research is basically showing that depression, rumination, these persistent thoughts, is a very useful thing. So I have a good example of that will make intuitive sense to most of the viewers for how depressive rumination can be useful.
Fire away.
Okay, great. So let's imagine that there's a physician who has made a very serious medical error, perhaps has hurt his patient, maybe even killed the patient. Most physicians, unless they're psychopathic, would feel a lot of agony over this because their whole job is to try and help their patients. Now, errors happen within medicine. They happen, almost every physician's going to make a serious error at some point in their life. So anyway, they're going to feel a lot of agony. The agony will often reach clinical levels. They'll show the features of depression, of anxiety, acute stress reactions. And what are they feeling agony over? Well, they've hurt their patient. They are worried about their careers, loss of reputation, possibility of losing their license. Okay, now that agony motivates them to do something. What is it that they are motivated to do?
Hopefully to do better.
Exactly. Actually, that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to avoid making a similar mistake in the future. And so they go through an intense thought process that actually helps them learn where they got things wrong and to do better in the future.
Okay, let me take that and put it to Marianne, which is, do you think that means that people that are prone to depression are more likely to become intellectuals or thinkers?
I do. And I really like Paul's answer there because we have to unpack, first of all, what we mean by depression. And I'm very glad that he took that stance because that also falls in line with the work I've done. So we know that people with low levels of depression, for example, tend to think very critically. They tend to break a big situation down into smaller, maybe achievable steps even, which sounds a bit counterintuitive. But they're able to see things in a much more realistic manner. And they don't have that level of optimism that can be great in terms of how it feels, but it's also quite blinding. And so depression, at least in the forms Paul's discussed, might be very useful to make us think intellectually about a situation, break it down into those smaller, maybe more achievable steps as we ruminate upon how to solve those things and maybe make some progress. And so I really like that sort of framework, and I find that it fits well with the research overall, in my opinion. In terms of the second part of your question, though, I think intellectuals, I think they do take those bigger problems, and if they're going to be, good at solving them, they have to break it down. And I think there is therefore that link between the cognitive mechanisms underlying some forms of depression and maybe more intellectual routes of thinking.
Randolph, let me come at this another way with you. Evolution creates instincts that motivate us to do things to help our survival. Depression can lead to a lack of motivation entirely. So how would depression have been useful, evolutionarily speaking?
Oh, well put question. That puts your finger right on the conundrum, doesn't it? And if it stops you from doing things, how can that possibly be useful? But here's the way of looking at it. I mean, are there situations in which it's best to not take risks, not do things? And sure, there's lots of them. If you're in the middle of the winter, like my ancestors in an island in the North Sea, and the optimistic ones say, it's February, but I'm going to go out and find some food anyhow. I mean, those ancestors are no longer with us. If you're trying to reply to school for the 5th time, you're probably wasting your energy. There's a big difference between sadness, which is how we feel after a loss, and low mood and depression, which is what happens in a bunch of different situations, as Paul has emphasized, but especially when we're pursuing an unreachable goal. There's a whole sequence of unpleasant feelings that come up. First, you lose interest, and then you try a different strategy. If nothing works, disengage motivation entirely and try something different. So when you're trying to do something that's pursuing an unreachable goal, the best thing to do is try a different route, pause, wait, and if nothing works, quit.
Marianne, I see you nodding there. Can I get you to react to what you've just heard?
Randy, that was so eloquent. It's exactly that. I have a lot of students, and when I teach about depression and mood in my evolutionary psychology course, a lot of them say that they want to have this fantastic occupation and they have this huge career goal. And statistics show us that is highly unlikely, to put it politely. And so what we talk about is, yes, it's good to have that lofty dream. Why not, right? But if you're going to waste all your time and energy and in pursuit of that dream, and in the meantime not get anywhere, that's just not fruitful. And so we talk a lot about having, plans A, which could be like the lofty dream, but then having plan B, C, D, and E. So you have your fallback plan, you have your less desirable plan, you have maybe your more achievable, immediate feedback, get some money in plan for occupations. And I think it's so useful to think about that sort of balance point between that motivating spirit of, in Canada, we want to do all these great things and have the best life ever, but what's actually achievable, And I think if we set ourselves up for failure, we can't help but experience that devastation of a loss. So I really appreciate that framework that Randy put in place there.
Paul, does all of that fit with your view?
Yeah, I do believe that frustrated goals are an important trigger or cause of depression. I'm not sure that it encapsulates all the different causes of depression, but definitely I see a lot of commonality in thinking between Randy's framework and mine.
So don't dream too big?
Well, of course, natural selection sometimes asks us to dream big. And, if you don't dream big, you can never actually succeed big. It's just that, there are a lot of stuff in life involves taking risks. And if you're going to take risks, then sometimes maybe a lot of times you're going to lose.
Randolph, let me get you to do sort of a evolutionary psychiatry 101 here with this. Depression can lead to social withdrawal. There's another theory based on observations of primates, we're told, that may explain this. So let's do that. What is social rank theory?
A fellow named John Price, a wonderful psychiatrist in the UK, studied chickens, and he noticed that the chickens who lost a pecking order battle, who kept on fighting, got beat up really badly. And he pointed out that it was really best for those chickens to quit fighting. Then he did the same kind of study with monkeys, and he watched a monkey after it was taken out of a cage where it was with the females, and guess what? If it lost a battle and kept trying to fight, it got beat up pretty badly. So he came up with this idea of involuntary yielding, which means thinking badly about yourself and excessively badly about yourself in order to not keep on struggling in a status kind of conflict. And I think this is one of the situations that's very germane to depression.
Marianne, do you think this applies to humans?
I do. My main area of research is women's competition with each other, so intersexual competition. And I think in light of all the recent news about social media, for example, and how women are, as young women especially, are beginning to feel a loss of position, right? So they're constantly ranking themselves amongst their friends or have those indirect mechanisms where they're judging themselves against others. I do think that involuntary yielding is playing a significant role. But I think the underlying part of that is still, the evolutionary psychology of people trying to find the best mates possible, to form the best coalitions possible, and have the best prognosis for their own survival.
I got to use a sports analogy here for Randolph because, and since you are University of Michigan, the Detroit Red Wings never would have won 3 Stanley Cups in 6 years in the 1990s with the president of the Maple Leaf Hockey Club as one of their star players, if when the going got tough, the tough got going, if they just quit when things got too hard. So again, does this really apply to humans?
So sometimes, actually, I refuse to do interviews on public media because the interviewer will say, "So doesn't your theory mean you should just quit?" And of course, no. The reason this is also difficult is that there are good reasons why people don't quit pursuing some unreachable goal, like trying to get your kid off drugs, or trying to help your spouse with cancer, or trying to stop your own drinking. I mean, these are really poignant, intimate, deep life problems. And this is why, any generalization doesn't work. I'd say the deepest generalization I come to, that way that evolution makes things more useful, is let's use our understanding of why low mood exists to talk in depth for hours with people about the details of their lives, to try to figure out why it is they're stuck in some place, instead of trying to have a simplistic solution.
Okay, I'm glad you indulged me in that question anyway, and that you're going to stick with us for the rest of this, right?
I agreed to stay on this show. I look forward to the rest of it.
Terrific. Okay, Paul, how about this? Depression does not exactly make you optimistic about the future. Is pessimism evolutionarily advantageous?
Certainly can be. There's this concept in social and cognitive psychology called defensive pessimism, and it basically involves viewing the future negatively so that you can prepare for a negative future by having backup plans. Like, oh, if the things don't work out the way I want them to do, I need to have a backup plan. That is called defensive pessimism, and that concept is very adaptive. And that certainly plays a role in the depressive states that I study as well, yeah.
Marianne, where are you on this notion of defensive pessimism?
I haven't thought of it in terms of that, but I would say that, first of all, I'm an optimist. So this is really quite amusing to me in a way, because I believe in the goodness of people and all that great stuff. But pessimism is very useful. The rose-colored glasses have come off. You see things how they really are. And I think if you have a really good, firm idea of what sort of situations you're facing, and that might be there for pessimism, you're much more likely to be able to come up with a practical solution. So as I said, I haven't thought about it in terms of defensive pessimism. I like that idea, but I do think that pessimism often leads to much more constructive problem solving.
Randolph, how about you on that?
So most of us, like Marianne said before, are optimistic most of the time. And when we're in the midst of doing something that isn't working, at some point it becomes better to not be so optimistic blindly and to be more realistic about the options.
While you have the floor, let me try this with you. There's a long list of great thinkers and artists who have suffered from depression over the years. Do you think there is a link between depression and creativity that would explain why it has persisted over our evolutionary history?
So that's an open question scientifically that I look forward to other people continuing to pursue. On the other hand, if you look at how many people want to write a novel and how many people want to break into big time rock and roll and all the rest, it's lots and lots of people. And how many people keep going and keep going and keep going? Very, very few. The only people who actually make it to the top in many of these fields are the ones who fail over and over again and keep trying. And guess what? That's the kind of situation that makes it likely that you're going to be depressed. So it might be more a direction the other way, where pursuing grand goals, despite all kinds of obstacles, ends up causing depression. And that's one reason why a lot of very creative, successful people are depressed.
Paul, can I get your take on that?
Yeah, I like a lot of what Randy said there. I mean, the origin of the hypothesis that I conduct research on really isn't a modern one. It's an ancient one. It goes back to the ancient Greeks. The idea, really, that depressive thinking is careful, methodical, analytical, and often creative. Theophrastus, who was a student of Aristotle, said that all great thinkers are likely to become melancholic. And really it shows its greatest manifestation over history around the Renaissance. I mean, the classic play of Hamlet by Shakespeare, Shakespeare in that play plays with the two different ideas about depression. One, it's a mental disorder that disrupts your thinking, and also that it's a source of careful, methodical, scientific thinking. Hamlet in that play ends up using his depression to figure out how his uncle actually killed his father. And Shakespeare is very clear about that. Anyway, so that idea of creativity and analytical thinking and being tied to depression has a real ancient history. So while I agree with Randy, we should be doing a lot more research, I just want to point out that's an idea in our culture that has existed for a long period of time.
Marianne, do you want to weigh in on that?
Both people have said something really useful here to me. So, Randy's point that science still has a long way to go. Absolutely. I fully agree with that. And I also, I think it's important that we do recognize that culturally we've made that tie between like the tortured soul and great works of creativity. But I would say that, being creative, I think, involves that throwing risks to the wind and just going for it repeatedly and facing failure in most instances repeatedly. And I don't see how that can lead to a happy state of feeling. It's just, I think you'd have some low mood as a result of that constant feedback that it could be to do with failure. So all the points raised, I think, really have a lot of merit there.
Well, I know we are sort of discussing, as the title of Randolph's book would suggest, that there are good reasons for bad feelings. But having said that, is there a danger here, and Randolph, maybe you could start us off in this, is there a danger here of missing the obvious fact that depression is still a very debilitating disease, and it is more often than not a bad thing? Can we say that?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because some people misunderstand my point and imagine that I'm saying that depression is usually useful. I'm not. In fact, even when the mechanisms in the brain and psychology are normal, most depression is not useful, and there are complicated reasons for that. So there are two chapters in my book, one about depression being useful, and the other is called When the Moodostat Fails. And a lot of people who have bad depression, it really is a brain or psychological problem. It is a disease. So it's so important to try to make that distinction. I think you can only make that distinction, however, if you get into the details of a person's life as an individual, in addition to their genes, hormones, and all the rest.
Paul, how about you on that?
Well, this is where Randy and I will probably agree to disagree.
That's allowed here.
It's allowed, right? Good. Well, I believe, along with many other researchers, that our current diagnostic criteria for depression tends to pathologize many normal emotional experiences. I don't think that for most episodes of depression, even severe ones that last a long time, that there's anything really going wrong in the brain. Now, that doesn't mean that all episodes of depression produce adaptive or useful outcomes, but that's also true of just about every emotion. I think Marianne said that earlier on in this talk. How many times do we get angry and it gets us into trouble? Or we experience unrequited love, which is almost by definition a useless waste of time, right? But those are all part of normal human experiences, and we don't need to invoke any sort of disorder narrative for explaining that.
So do you see this more as disorder or as adaptation?
I believe most of it is adaptation. But that, again, I just want to say, doesn't mean that I believe that all outputs of that adaptation are adaptive. Again, I think almost every emotion produces maladaptive or harmful effects under certain circumstances. I don't know if Randy would agree on that or not.
I'm going to ask him, because I feel an obligation to let him have a chance to come back at you, so go ahead.
So the missing middle of this is whether normal mechanisms can give rise to a lot of useless anxiety and depression. I talk about something called the smoke detector principle. We all put up with smoke detectors that have false alarms because a false alarm is cheap, and not having an alarm when there's a big fire can be fatal. And so the system is set that way. Likewise, our brains are set that way. So there's a whole lot of very painful responses that are useless but normal.
Marianne, do you want to break the tie here?
I don't know if I can, because for me, one of the issues is how we're defining depression, obviously. So from my understanding, when we talk about more to do with low mood and smaller, shorter term bouts of depression, I would view that more as just part of our daily human experience. So just like another emotion, it's just an adaptation to our situation. Failing to recognize that something is causing you harm or is interfering in your relationships and so on would have dramatic and really negative costs to you in terms of evolutionary history. At the same time, I think, especially within longer term depression or other situations, there could be more at play, especially biologically. So I don't really have a tiebreaker addition here. So sorry about that, but I really think that it comes down to how we're thinking about depression.
No, you can't blame me for trying to stir up a little trouble here, can you? There we go.
Right.
Let me quote the science writer Robert Wright, who said, "Evolutionary psychology reminds us that we were not designed by natural selection to be enduringly happy or contented." Okay, that's the quote. Is one of the big takeaways here that evolution really doesn't give a darn about our happiness? Randolph, what do you say?
Absolutely, and it's so sad, but we should pause here. It's a miracle and wonderful that so many people can be pretty happy much of the time. I mean, we should just pause and just be thankful that that's actually possible.
If we watched, I would say mostly American, but occasionally Canadian cable television, we would never come away with that impression. So you sure you want to stick with that?
I'll stick with it. Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Just see your friends instead of TV. That's it.
Marianne, you want to follow up on that?
That was great, Randy. I view people basically as strategists and opportunists, and we're all striving to be happy. We're all striving for what's best for ourselves, to some degree, and best for our family, and maybe best for our kins and allies and friends and so on. But evolution itself doesn't care. I feel it's really, happiness, I think, is part of our evolutionary history because it's a way of signaling to us that we're doing the right thing. And we're motivated rather to try in the right approaches that will help either improve our fitness or the likelihood of our children surviving, ourselves surviving, and so on. So I don't think evolution has any sort of goal that way. But I would say that it is really, as Randy pointed out, a miracle that most of the time, most of us are fairly content. And that is remarkable.
Paul, we heard Randolph say earlier that most people who never have a sad moment in their lives end up not living very long. Do you think being content and happy all the time, is that an evolutionary disadvantage?
Yeah, I do. I think that our nervous system, evolution has given our nervous system the capacity to feel so many different kinds of feelings, painful feelings. You can think about all the different pain receptors that allow us to feel the pain of hot or cold or smashing objects or cutting objects, etc. And then with our emotions, we have all sorts of painful feelings: shame, guilt, sadness, depression, anxiety, fear, etc. They're there for reasons. And as Randy said, if people who lack the ability to feel pain have very short lives, and that's probably true with depression too. Depression has its place in our life. We need to figure out what it is that depression does. But the other thing that I would say is, like Randy, I'm not of the opinion that just because depression might be evolved and do something useful, that doesn't mean we should glorify it or say that people shouldn't seek out treatment or help. But I do think that understanding whether or not depression is an evolved adaptation that natural selection has given us, or it's a disorder where something's going wrong in the brain, those will determine which therapy may be best for the treating, right? So understanding etiology, the cause of a condition like depression, whether it's a disorder or a normal emotional state, that's crucial to how we treat.
Randolph, we just heard Paul say we shouldn't glorify depression, but don't we tend to do that? Don't we look back and look at the Ernest Hemingways of the world and say, my goodness, they were so magnificent and they lived amidst all of this depression, and look at what wonderful things they created? Sounds like we do glorify.
I think we do sometimes, yep. And, we haven't mentioned bipolar disease. That's really quite a different kettle of fish than the kinds of depression we've been talking about. And it may well be the case that many people with bipolar disease do have special kinds of creativity and pay a terrible price for it. So again, it's complicated, and we need to ask people one by one to try to understand things.
Down to our last couple of minutes here, Marianne, let me put this to you. What are the practical applications of looking at depression and mental illness through this evolutionary lens?
I think the biggest benefit is understanding that depression is part of who we are. And, when people ask you how you're feeling and you say, oh, I'm happy, they go, great. I'm busy, great. But when you say, I'm experiencing low mood or I'm feeling depressed, if they really care, they're going to say, oh, what's going on? And if you really care about them, you would actually be honest and say you're feeling that low mood, depressed. So I think the benefit to having the evolutionary approach is that it teaches us that the stigma we have in place about depression doesn't need to be there. It can be removed, and it can allow us to reach out maybe more freely if we view it as part of our evolutionary heritage. It's not something that you in particular may have done within your own life situation that's caused it. So I think it might help us to be a bit more free about discussing it and having that the weight of evolutionary psychology behind us to begin to unpackage what's going on for the individual. But I would like to point out that Randy made one really important point, I felt, and that was that, we can't have these broad generalizations across individuals. And in psychology, especially, I think we're very aware that we have to have individualized forms of treatment. And I think evolutionary psychology here would be one part of that treatment or one part of that discussion. And of course, we need to understand individuals a lot deeper to really have that benefit overall.
Sure. Randall, practical applications of looking at this through an evolutionary lens?
So actually, an article was just published 2 days ago by Hans Schroeder, a colleague of mine at University of Michigan, where he did a study looking at the implications of how we view our own depression. And one group of people were given the idea that depression is a brain disease and that's it. And other people were told it's more like what Marianne was saying and Paul was saying, that it's a part of our lives and it has functional significance. It turns out that thinking about one's own depression as just a product of the brain without thinking more deeply about it makes people passive and pessimistic about their ability to get better. I'm going to give a half a minute case. I once saw a sad kid who had been living in his parents' basement for years, and he came in and said, we got to do something different. I've tried 7 different drugs. You've got to find one. I said, well, what else can we talk about? He says, well, I know it's a brain disease, and I'm just waiting until someone finds the right drug. I said, you got to get out of the basement, man. And he said, no, it's a brain disease. We just have to wait. So this is a situation where I think our evolutionary framework helps people to take a broader, less stigmatizing view of their own problems.
Gotcha. That was fascinating, you three. Thank you so much for coming on to TVO tonight and having this conversation. Randolph Nesse in Brighton, Michigan, Marianne Fisher, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Paul Andrews of McMaster University here in our studio. All good wishes, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Humans like to put themselves at the center of history as the agents of change or perseverance or triumph. All well and good until you consider the animating thesis of Jonathan Kennedy's new book. It's called Pathogenesis, A History of the World in 8 Plagues. As the title suggests, Kennedy argues that germs, in fact, propelled some of the most significant shifts in human affairs. Jonathan Kennedy teaches politics and global health at Queen Mary University of London, and he's with us now on the line from London, UK for more. Jonathan, it's good to have you on the air here. How are you?
It's great to be here. I'm very well, thank you.
Excellent. Let's start with a quote from the book. You write, "The modern world has been shaped by microbes as much as by women and men." Now, that is going to come as news to anybody who's read some history. So help us out here. How so?
Well, I think we have to start off with the way that we view the world. And I think our mindset is still very much stuck in the age of the Old Testament. So if we go back to the book of Genesis, God supposedly created humans in his own image and gave us dominion over the natural world. So we still very much see this natural world as a stage on which humans, whether that's great men and women or classes, play out our roles. But actually, the more the more we know about the natural world, the more we realize that it's not a stage. We're actually, it's a system. It's an ecosystem. And if we want to live in that ecosystem successfully, then humans' role is actually pretty insubstantial. And there's actually many ways of kind of measuring the impact of microbes. And we can start off just with a few facts about the numbers of microbes there are. So, for example, if we tried to weigh all the bacteria that lived on the planet, they would weigh over 1,000 times more than all the humans living on the planet.
There was another factoid. I'm sorry, I was just going to say there's another factoid I think I remember from your book, which is to say that if we considered the natural world in its entirety, as a calendar year, for example, humans show up on December 31st. That's how not part of the story we have been for the longest time.
Yeah, and just before midnight at that, maybe half an hour before midnight. So if we think bacteria have been around for something like 3.5 billion years, and humans of any type have been around for a couple of million, Homo sapiens, 200,000, maybe a bit more than that. So, it's an astonishing difference in time. And, humans have had to evolve to live in a world that is dominated, and in many ways still dominated, by microbes. So just to give you another example, another factoid, there's something like 40 trillion bacteria living in and on our bodies. So our microbe consists of more bacteria than there are human cells in the body. And we increasingly understand the role that they play in things like digestion, and that's very much a hot topic in popular science. But I think what we're beginning to understand is that they play other really important roles in our body and even our minds. So a particularly interesting piece of research recently looked at the DNA of bacteria in our feces, and it found that something like 90% of all the bacteria in our feces are capable of producing neurotransmitters, so chemical messengers that are able to influence our mood, things like serotonin and dopamine. And this is just absolutely mind-blowing. And it also opens up some interesting questions for medical science, because perhaps in the future it will perhaps in the future we can really use the power of microbes to deal with some major health issues. So even dealing with depression. So the same study found that people who had clinical depression were lacking in a couple of types of bacteria. And so perhaps in the future, the best way to treat clinical depression will be to put these bacteria into our guts rather than to treat it with something like therapy or Prozac, for example.
Well, let's go back and take a look at some various important stops through history. And our first stop is going to be the Paleolithic era. So once upon a time, Homo sapiens shared the planet with Homo neanderthals. And Homo sapiens won the contest with the Neanderthals. And you're going to tell us why.
Well, I think the first thing to remember is the dominant explanation for why. And, most textbooks tell us that humans won out because we were smarter, we were more intelligent. This is even implicit in the name that we give ourselves, Homo sapiens, so wise humans. And actually, one of the nice little snippets that I found out when I was researching this book was in the 19th century, there were some scientists that seriously proposed that Neanderthals should be referred to as Homo stupidus. So that really kind of underlines this kind of wise, stupid dichotomy through which we see ourselves and Neanderthals. But actually, when we look at the evidence that's been gathered over the last 10 years, we see that Neanderthals really aren't that much different to our own species, to Homo sapiens. We now know that they buried their dead, possibly even that they lay flowers on the graves of the dead. We know that they looked after their sick. We know that they used various medicinal herbs to treat maladies. We know that they talked to one another. There's even evidence that they were able to sail or travel by boat between islands in the Eastern Mediterranean. They painted caves. So this builds up this image of Neanderthals as, not that different to us. So that raises the question, why did they disappear 50,000 years ago, whereas we survived? And I think the most powerful explanation is that Homo sapiens, who had evolved in tropical Africa, carried more and more deadly infectious diseases as we migrated out of the African continent. And so when we came into contact with Neanderthals, they got very sick and died out. And so yeah, even from the very beginning of human prehistory, really, you see the important role of infectious diseases.
So it wasn't so much our brains, we just had better immune systems.
Yeah, or even we carried more diseases, and we had evolved to be resistant to those diseases. We'd evolved over 100,000 years or so.
All right, let's go to the next era we want to focus on, and that's the Neolithic era and the advent of farming. And here's what you write about that. It is remarkable to think that the impact of the migration of a small number of shepherds out of the Western Eurasian steppe 5,000 years ago, which was most likely made possible by a devastating plague pandemic, can literally still be seen and heard today across the world. Okay, what do you mean by that? Still seen and heard today across the world?
Well, if we go back to about 5,000 years ago, which is when Stonehenge was first built, the population of the British Isles and most of Western Europe were a group of olive-skinned, dark-eyed people who had migrated across Europe and brought farming with them. And all of a sudden, about 4,500 years ago, these people disappear from Great Britain or from the British Isles, and they're replaced by a new group of people who are taller. They often have blue eyes and they have fairer features, and they originated from the far east of Europe on the steppe, these vast grasslands where they'd been shepherding animals. And again, this has been a really kind of difficult mystery to solve. Why did this happen? Why did a well-established farming community seemingly disappear? And there's an increasing amount of evidence that suggests that this was a plague pandemic. So this evidence comes from ancient DNA. So over the last 10 years, scientists have really improved their techniques for extracting and analyzing DNA from really old bones. But when they extract the DNA, they don't just get human genetic material, they also get the material of the microbes that were in our blood, in the blood at the time of death. And so by looking at this DNA, this microbial DNA, you can get a pretty good idea of what people were dying of 5,000 or so years ago. And there's been a number of finds over the last few years of plague, basically across Europe, from England all the way, in Sweden, in Germany, and Latvia, all the way to the far east. So this builds this picture of a devastating plague pandemic that cleared the way for these shepherds about kind of 4,000 years ago. And remarkably, these shepherds that they basically brought their genetic material, but they also seem to be the source of Indo-European languages. So the languages that are spoken by people in, well, I guess Canada, for one, but also in much of Europe, in Central Asia, and even in the northern parts of the Indian subcontinent. So it's really remarkable, I think, that we can still literally see and hear the consequences of this pandemic that occurred 5,000 years ago.
Let's bring you a little more closer to our time. Well, we're still going to be 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire. How did infectious diseases weaken the Roman Empire?
Yeah, well, I think an important point from the book is that, kind of what we might see as development often creates kind of new conditions in which infectious diseases can prosper. So in the first couple of centuries of the first millennium, Rome was a really remarkable polity. It kind of Rome ruled a vast area all the way from Scotland in the northwest to the Arabian Peninsula. It was incredibly prosperous. Rome was a city of 1 million people. So basically, the next city to be this big was London in the 19th century, and that just gives you an idea of how remarkable Rome was. But this kind of level of urbanization and the incredible extent of interconnectedness in the Roman Empire created the perfect conditions for infectious diseases to spread. And so you have a couple of devastating plagues in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, the Antonine Plague and the Plague of Cyprian, which really kind of devastate the Roman Empire. And you can see this, for example, in ice cores that have been drilled in Greenland recently, that there's a drop in lead pollution around the time of these pandemics, which seem to show that the economy just basically kind of stopped, came to a sudden halt, because the majority of lead pollution would have come from processing silver, which was used for the currency. So yeah, again, infectious diseases played a really important role in the slow, steady decline of the Roman Empire.
And how about in the rise of two of the world's most significant religions, Christianity and Islam? What role did they play there?
Yeah, so there's a big kind of, again, a big mystery with Christianity. It didn't just become an empire-wide religion when Jesus was crucified. For the first 250 years after Jesus' death, it was a pretty small religion with maybe about 100,000 followers at the beginning of the third century. So that was less than 1% of the whole Roman population. And then all of a sudden, towards the end of the 3rd century, you see this absolute explosion in the number of Christians. And why this was the case is kind of a really, really important question. And I think a convincing answer to this is that Christianity basically provided a much more assuring guide to life and death during pandemics than paganism. Paganism basically said that the here and now is all that there is, and that pandemics are a result of the gods' anger. We're not quite sure what often, but the anger of the gods, and in particular Apollo. But Christianity, Jesus' message, really emphasized the role of suffering in this life, and saw that as a key to gaining entrance to an everlasting paradise in the next. And also there was a big stress in Christianity on doing good deeds. So there are eyewitness accounts of basically the pagans abandoning their sick and running off to the countryside to try and survive the plague. But the Christians came and looked after them, and even basic nursing, like providing water and food, meant that something like 2/3 of those people who had been abandoned survived. And this created the best commercial that any religion could have, really, which is miracles, or something that seemed to be a miracle. And also the same with Islam, and it's what seems on the face of it to be miraculous growth in the 100 or so years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632. So within a century and a bit of Muhammad's death, you see Islam has spread out from the Arabian Peninsula and kind of Arabian Islamic armies control an empire that goes all the way from Spain and Morocco in the west to the borders of China in the east. And we can only really understand this in the context of plagues that were devastating both the late Roman and the Persian empires at this time. And these were very urban, very well-connected empires, whereas the people living in the Arabian Peninsula were largely protected from these plagues because they were often nomadic, and if they weren't nomadic, it was still a very sparsely populated area. So when these two big empires, the Romans and the Persians, were being weakened and weakened, this relatively increased the power of the Arab Muslim armies. And when the time was right, they pushed out of the peninsula and spread really, really quickly.
Let's talk about the Black Death in the medieval era. And you write that without the Black Death, we might still be in the Middle Ages. Okay, explain that if you would.
Yeah, so I think the thing that you have to remember is that in the Middle Ages, in the feudal system, there was very little incentive for anybody to innovate, particularly agricultural producers. The vast majority of the population were farmers, agricultural producers, because if you were a feudal lord, it was a very unstable system. You were probably warring a bit with your neighbors, so there was a big incentive to basically spend any surplus resources on building defenses and developing your army. And if you didn't do this, if instead you focused on building windmills or on irrigation, then it was likely that someone would come along and conquer your territory. And even if you were a serf, a peasant, there wasn't much incentive to produce lots of stuff, because it was likely that the Lord was just going to take it away from you. The incentive structure basically was such that it was best to be risk averse and to plant a variety of different crops on different parts of the Lord's estate to make sure that if something was devastated by disease or extreme weather events or wild animals, then at least you'd have something else to live on for the year. And so it would have seemed at the beginning of the 1300s that basically this feudal system might kind of stay like that forever. But then all of a sudden you have the Black Death, which comes from Central Asia and arrives in the middle of the 1300s and kills over half of the population in about 5 years. And, that's devastating. But then you have secondary plagues, and then you have other instances of plague coming back again and again and devastating the population. So the English population doesn't recover its pre-Black Death size until the 18th century. And this demographic shock basically creates a struggle between the serfs and the feudal lords. And this plays out over 100 years, maybe even longer. But eventually you get to the end of this struggle and the serfs have won their freedom. But basically the lords end up renting out large plots of land to entrepreneurial peasants at market rates. And so these peasants basically become commercial farmers, and they have to invest in the latest technology and grow crops that are particularly suited to the area where they're growing them. And this leads to a boom in agricultural production that basically kickstarts capitalism and, again, changes the world in ways that we're still very much feeling today, for better and for worse.
So you can actually draw a direct connection between the Black Death and capitalism.
Yeah, there's a very clear kind of chain of events that link the two.
Okay, let's. There's so much history in this book, and we haven't got time to cover it all in one conversation. But I do want to get a better understanding of this. How did writing this book change you and how you thought about history differently?
Well, I guess I was like everyone else, I was brainwashed into thinking that, humans are the driving force of history. And so I think, really kind of spending a couple of years reading about infectious diseases and reading about their role on human history, I guess it makes you a bit more humble, and it makes you realize that, we really are living in a finely balanced world. And if we're not careful, our species will really come into some trouble. But I think as well, you just come to the realization that although we like to think that COVID was an aberration, a kind of once in a century occurrence, when you look back at history, you realize that this isn't the case. There's nothing particularly unusual about the coronavirus pandemic. In fact, there's periodic cases throughout history of kind of these devastating pandemics coming along and, really causing massive death and disruption. And so I think the the key thing is that we need to realize that, we have to prepare for the next pandemic in the best way possible. And that means, on the one hand, kind of people with a medical background developing their understanding of diseases and of cures and preventions to those diseases. But also, we need to really understand how our society creates habitats that allow infectious diseases to flourish. Certainly in many ways, we're living now in a new golden age for microbes. The unprecedented size of the world's population, the encroachment on animal habitats, industrial scale factory farming, and also the ease with which we can travel across the world very, very quickly. These combine to create, the perfect conditions for pathogens to jump from other species to humans and to spread around the world really, really quickly. So we have to be prepared for this, but also try to kind of mitigate the chance of that happening.
Well, just in our last 30 seconds here, if there's one big takeaway from your book is that the next disaster is, you can set your watch to it. It's never that far away. And I wonder whether you think we yet understand how the disaster we have just come through, COVID-19, is going to rewrite this next chapter of our history.
Well, I think it's a fool's errand for people to try to predict the future, but certainly I think we can feel that COVID is having an impact, sometimes for the good, if we think about work from home. And I'm not sure how things are in Canada, but certainly in this country, sky high inflation rates are really causing a lot of problem. And again, you can trace that back to the pandemic and the response to the pandemic. So I think we won't really know for years to come, but certainly the world after the pandemic is very different to the one before it. And I think to finish on an optimistic note, we really have to ensure that the change that COVID has brought about is positive and work towards that.
The name of the book is Pathogenesis, A History of the World in 8 Plagues. It has brought Jonathan Kennedy to our virtual studio from London, UK. It's a great pleasure to meet you, and thanks for joining us tonight on TVO.
Oh, it was really lovely. Thank you for the time.
And that is the agenda for Tuesday, June 13th, 2023. Housing has been front and center throughout the race for Mayor of Toronto. Tomorrow, we'll evaluate policy solutions put forward by the candidates and some already in the works. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.